Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Tonight, just as Toan and Tu Diem sit down for a quiet dinner, one unexpected phone call shatters the calm and pulls them into a night they never saw coming. Now we continue the story of Toan and Tu Diem, where love is tested not by distance, but by fear, guilt, and the need to protect the ones who once protected us. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. Evening came quickly. After the workers left, the yard fell back into its usual quiet. The sounds of shovels and conversation from the daytime were gone. What remained was the damp smell of soil mixed with fresh concrete, hanging lightly in the cold air. A gentle wind slipped through the fence, making the plastic sheets rustle softly. Tu Diem stood for a moment, watching the truck disappear down the small road. She let out a long breath, as if releasing some of the tiredness she had been holding inside. Toan stood beside her, saying nothing. He looked once more at the yard, then turned and went back inside. Tu Diem rolled up her sleeves and entered the kitchen first. Toan followed behind. The light came on, casting a warm yellow glow across the tiled floor. The small space immediately felt calmer. Neither of them spoke much. After such a long day, the silence felt familiar, almost necessary, like a pause their bodies had learned to accept. Tu Diem rinsed the rice. Cold water ran over her hands, making her fingers stiff. She washed slowly and carefully, just as she always did. Toan bent down to light the stove. He arranged the firewood and struck a flame. The wood crackled as it caught, the sound steady and comforting. Small, ordinary actions filled the room. Nothing special, nothing out of place. Everything felt exactly like any other evening. That sense of normalcy made it easy to believe the day would end quietly, just like most days did. Toan glanced up at Tu Diem. She stood with her back to him, shoulders slightly lowered from exhaustion. Yet her movements remained neat and deliberate. Her face did not show stress, only a faint paleness from the long hours. Seeing her like this, Toan felt his chest loosen. At least for now, everything still seemed under control. The rice finished cooking. The warm smell spread through the kitchen, mixing with the simple dishes simmering on the stove. They set the table, a pot of white rice, a plate of boiled vegetables, a bowl of soup. Nothing fancy, nothing extra, but familiar and warm in its own way. They sat down across from each other. Out of habit, Toan served Tu Diem first. It was something he did at almost every meal without thinking. Tu Diem looked at him and gave a small nod, thanking him with her eyes. Both of them picked up their chopsticks. The first bite had not yet reached their mouths. The phone rang. The sound cut sharply through the quiet kitchen, clear and sudden. Both of them froze. Tu Diem turned her head toward the phone lying beside the table. The screen lit up. She glanced at it, then spoke, her voice slowing slightly. "It's Thu." She picked up immediately. No hesitation. Toan remained silent, but in that same moment, he felt a heaviness settle in his chest. It was not pain, not exactly, just an uncomfortable pressure, vague but unsettling. The kind of feeling that came with a bad premonition. Tu Diem listened. At first, her expression stayed neutral, but after a few seconds, something shifted. Her eyebrows tightened slightly. Her grip on the phone grew firmer. Toan noticed every change. The feeling in his chest deepened. He placed his chopsticks down on the table. He had not asked yet, but he already knew something was wrong. Tu Diem listened carefully. She did not interrupt, only short replies. "Yes, I understand. I'll tell him." When the call ended, she lowered the phone but kept it in her hand. She did not turn to Toan right away. She took a quiet breath, steadying herself. Toan spoke first, his voice low and slow. "What happened?" Tu Diem looked at him. She didn't avoid his eyes. She spoke calmly, each word clear. Thu said, "Something happened to the old lady." Toan froze. Tu Diem continued, repeating what Thu had just heard. "Yesterday, the old woman went out to work in the field, like she usually did. She slipped and fell. A nearby neighbor saw it and ran over. Her hand was injured. She said she was fine, but the neighbor noticed how much pain showed on her face. The neighbor helped her home. Today, no one saw her go out to the field." Hearing this, Toan felt as if the strength drained out of him all at once. He leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers clenched tightly. Guilt surged up quickly, heavy and sharp. The old lady, the one who had saved him when he was at his lowest, the one who had taken him in and cared for him during his hardest time. And yet lately, he had been busy with building the house, with work, with countless small concerns, and he had not paid enough attention to her. In his mind appeared the image of her bent back, her thin arms, still working in the fields every day. His throat tightened as the image settled. Tu Diem watched him closely and saw the panic rising. She reached out and placed her hand over his, holding it firmly, grounding him. "Stay calm," she said softly. "We don't know exactly how bad it is yet." Toan did not answer. In his mind, there was only one thought. He needed to go there now, immediately. He stood up abruptly. "I have to go see her." Tu Diem stopped him at once. She did not raise her voice. Her tone remained steady but firm. "I know you're worried. But sit down. The food is already here. Let's eat quickly, then we'll go together." Toan shook his head. He did not want to eat. He only wanted to leave. But then he looked at Tu Diem. Her face was tense as well. She had been exhausted all day. If she did not eat now, her body would not hold up. He stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "Eat quickly." They returned to the table. No one said another word. Each of them ate one bowl of rice, fast, but forcing themselves to finish. There was no taste, no enjoyment. Just eating for strength. As soon as they finished, both stood up. Tu Diem put on her jacket and grabbed her bag. Toan took the flashlight. They stepped outside, closed the door behind them, and headed straight toward the old woman's house. It was fully dark now. The narrow road was empty. The wind felt colder than it had in the afternoon. They walked quickly, almost without speaking. When they arrived, the old woman was sitting inside. Hearing movement, she looked up in surprise. When she saw Toan and Tu Diem standing there, she froze. "Why did you two come so late?" Toan rushed forward, his eyes filled with tears. His voice trembled. "Are you okay?" The old woman looked at him and understood immediately that they had heard the news. Seeing Toan like this, her own eyes reddened. Still, she forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just a little pain in my hand." Toan took her hand. It was swollen and warm to the touch. His voice caught in his throat. "And you say you're fine?" He turned to Tu Diem. His eyes said everything. He wanted to take her to get checked. Tu Diem nodded at once. She spoke gently but firmly to the old woman. "Please go get checked with us, just to be safe. I brought money." The old woman looked at both of them. At their genuine concern, she could not bring herself to refuse. She nodded. They helped her outside into the night. The three of them walked close together. From a distance, anyone would think they were a family. The road leading to the small clinic was quiet. Yellow streetlights were spaced far apart, casting soft light onto the cold, damp ground. Toan walked close to the old woman, one hand supporting her elbow, the other holding a flashlight. Tu Diem walked on the other side, slow and careful with every step. The old woman walked slowly, but did not complain. From time to time, she took a deep breath, holding back the pain. Watching her like this made Toan's heart tighten. Each step she took reminded him of how little attention he had given her lately. When they reached the clinic, the lights were still on. A doctor on night duty looked up as the three of them entered. From the way they stood together, anyone could tell they were close, even without words. The old woman sat down. Toan and Tu Diem stood on either side of her. The doctor asked a few questions and gently examined her hand. When he lightly turned her wrist, she winced. Toan held his breath. The doctor worked carefully and slowly. After a few minutes, he said, "No broken bones, just a sprain. Apply the medicine for a few days and avoid heavy work." Those words lifted a heavy weight from all of them. Tu Diem let out a quiet sigh of relief. Toan lowered his head, the tightness in his chest finally easing. The doctor gave a few more instructions. Take the medicine on time, rest. Stay away from the field for a few days. The old woman nodded again and again, still smiling gently, as if it were nothing serious. On the way back, she walked more slowly than before, but her face looked more relaxed. Toan stayed close, supporting her carefully. He did not speak much, but every movement showed how worried he was, as if one careless step might cause her pain again. Back at her house, the light came on. The familiar, simple space felt warm. The old woman sat down on an old wooden chair. Toan and Tu Diem sat across from her. She looked at them with concern. "How have you two been lately?" It was a simple, everyday question, but it made Toan lower his head. His throat tightened. "We've been okay," he said softly. "But I feel guilty." The old woman reached out with her uninjured hand and held his. Her hand was thin and dry, but warm. She looked straight into his eyes. Her eyes were red, yet kind. "Don't think that way. I'm fine. I was just careless." Toan shook his head. Tears welled up. "You saved me. You took care of me, and I've been so busy that I didn't look after you enough." The old woman smiled slowly, gently. "Everyone has their own life. Seeing you live well makes me happy. I'm old now. Falling once in a while is normal." Hearing this, Tu Diem turned her face slightly away. She did not want the old woman to see her eyes turn red. After a while, the old woman looked at both of them again. "It's late. You should go home. The road is quiet at night. It's dangerous." Toan froze. He looked at her, then at Tu Diem. Inside him, there was a strong struggle. He wanted to stay. He wanted to be with her tonight, but the small house could not fit 3 people, and he could not let Tu Diem go home alone. The old woman understood. She held both of their hands and squeezed gently. "I'm fine. If anything happens, I'll call. You're still young. Take care of yourselves." Toan bowed his head deeply. After a moment, he said, "I'll come early tomorrow." She nodded. Toan and Tu Diem stood up. Before leaving, Tu Diem reminded her to take the medicine and avoid heavy work. The old woman smiled and nodded like a well-behaved child. They stepped outside. The door closed behind them. The night air felt colder. The road home was silent. They walked side by side without speaking for a long time. Only their footsteps and the sound of the wind filled the space. Finally, Toan spoke, his voice low. I feel like I haven't done enough. Tu Diem looked at him. She did not argue. She only said, "You've done everything you could." Toan did not reply, but inside him something was clear. He needed to care more, not only for the old woman, but for everyone he loved. When they reached home, the light was still on. The dinner table from earlier was still there, the food now cold. Toan looked at it briefly, then turned off the light. They went inside and closed the door. That night, they lay beside each other. They did not talk much, but both knew that after this night, some things would change.